Okay, so good evening again. My name is Sarah Pate, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Washington Center for the Book, an affiliate of the Library of Congress Center for the Book, and a partnership between the Washington State Library and the Seattle Public Library. The Washington Center for the Book promotes literacy and a love of books, reading, and libraries. We celebrate Washington's robust literary heritage and shine a spotlight on the contribution of reading and libraries in strengthening communities and in fostering civic engagement. One of our projects is the Washington State Book Awards, and we are thrilled to present the first in a series of online events with our 2021 Washington State Book Award winners with you here tonight. Our next event will be December 9th at 6 p.m. with several editors and contributors of Take a Stand, Art Against Hate, a Raven Chronicles anthology. And I'll put the link to that event and our other confirmed events in the series in the chat after I do this intro. We'd also like to thank our event partner for tonight and for this entire series, the Washington Library Association. WLA's mission is to lead, advocate, educate, and connect. And you can find out more about our state's Library Association at wla.org. As you have questions for EJ this evening, please put them in the Q&A section so that we can help facilitate getting your questions to EJ when the Q&A begins. It's now my pleasure to introduce Zola Mumford, an academic librarian, a Washington State Book Awards judge, a researcher, a writer, and curator of the Seattle Black Film Festival, a program of Langston, a nonprofit arts organization. As a researcher, she has written about Pacific Northwest history for HistoryLink.org. Mumford has been a speaker and panelist on subjects ranging from archival research to film history to science fiction and speculative fiction. Her professional background also includes media and arts production, historical research, and preservation work with film and print materials in university and private film and art archives. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening, Zola. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I have the honor of introducing tonight's author. Audience members, thank you so much for joining us tonight. E.J. Koh is the author of the memoir, The Magical Language of Others, published by Tin House Books in 2020, winner of the Washington State Book Award, winner of the Pacific Northwest Book Award, longlisted for the PEN Open Book Award, and author of the poetry collection A Lesser Love, published by Louisiana State University Press in 2017, and winner of the Pleiades Editors Prize for Poetry. She is the co-translator of Yuan's poetry collection, The World's Lightest Motorcycle, published this year, if I'm right, by Zephyr Press, 2021. Koh has received fellowships from the American Literary Translators Association, MacDowell, and Kundiman. Her poems, translations, and stories have appeared in Agni, the Boston Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Poetry Magazine, Slate, and elsewhere. She earned her MFA at Columbia University in New York for creative writing and literary translation. Currently, she is a PhD candidate at the University of Washington in English literature, studying Korean American literature, history, and film. Welcome, EJ. And may I call you EJ, or is Anji okay?
EJ, it's great. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
Well, not just in my role as a Washington State Book Awards judge, but as a reader and someone who really likes a well-written memoir, have been praising your memoir to many different people. I think there's something in it for a lot of different folks. Audience members, if you're here, I'm assuming you already have read the synopsis very quickly. This is the synopsis provided by the publisher. After living in America for over a decade, Eunji Ko's parents returned to South Korea for work, leaving 15-year-old Eunji and her brother behind in California. Overnight, Eunji finds himself abandoned and adrift, and a world made strange by her mother's absence. Her mother writes letters in Korean over the years, seeking forgiveness and love. Letters that MJ cannot fully understand until she finds them years later hidden in a box, and many of those letters are reproduced in the text. And please correct my pronunciation as we go along. I should have asked that before we started, and now I'm just realizing it.
No, it's great. It's wonderful. And I feel so fortunate to get the chance to be in conversation with you. And I'm also a fan of you and your work. So I'm really looking forward to learning more from you tonight.
That's so kind. Thank you. So I'm going to ask you the question that everyone's asking writers now. How has the change in being able to go out and do things affected you as a writer over the last year and a half?
Yeah. Hmm. I feel like there was a moment where I stopped writing for a little bit, and it seemed like whatever I was going to write next was something I had to wait for. I think I was sort of it brought me back into my body is the only way I can explain it. I felt so close to the surface of my skin, and that I was so aware of our relationships, even more so than before. And my relationship with writing, I could sense that something about it was going to change. And I think I had to wait and just go on walks and have the conversations I needed to have before I got back into sort of writing for long, long periods, and being at home and trying to find things to appreciate and then share those things with people around me. So
Yeah, I think many of us value the people in our lives in even more profound ways now.
yeah.
So let's start with some general questions. So your parents moved to South Korea when you were just 15, leaving you and your older brother in Davis, California. And you were still in communication, but there's still a feeling of loss, maybe even of loneliness connected between you and your parents. And you don't really spend a lot of time with your parents for the next 9 years. I mean, your life goes on and you're traveling and learning and growing and doing all these things, but you aren't necessarily having that primary relationship where you can see each other very often. And that time between the late teens and early adulthood for anybody can be a sort of lonely place as your relationships change and you might feel a little lost. Technology can help to ease that, but sometimes it can even make us feel more lonely. Technology isn't absent from your memoir. It helps, some of the practical things that you're doing, moving through the world, like travel. But the most powerful interactions in the memoir seem to happen either face to face or in the handwritten letters that your mother sends, and also the family oral history.
Wow. Thank you for that question, Zola. I don't think I've ever been asked that before, which is so exciting. And I feel like you've already opened a new dialogue with the memoir. So thank you. And when I think about the technology, it's so funny. There's a moment in the book that I go to, I'm inside the Davis house and I go toward the refrigerator where I've put up a piece of paper with my mother's number on it, the number to Korea. It's like 18 digits or something. So it's really long and I have to paste it put it up with a magnet, and then I'm calling on the landline, right? It's not, we don't have iPhones, so I'm not auto dialing. It's pushing every button and being right there in the refrigerator. So something about that experience contrasts so much when I get to Korea. I think for me, at least in that moment when I went to Korea, the sort of how much technology I was exposed to changed dramatically, even with the front door of my mother's apartment. You know, it was like a press pad, which I'd never seen before at the time. And also payment was automated then, with your phone, or even getting on the bus. So seeing all these big technological advancements in Korea at the time, and from the perspective I was having in my life in Davis, I think it exaggerates. This is what's so interesting, because I don't think about this too much, but it's there, where my mother and I, we have a class difference. It's the strangest thing, but when my mother went to Korea, her life changed, and everything around her looked different, and I was not a part of that. And so when I moved to Davis, I'm still, doing the canned soup, which was delicious, Tabasco, and dialing and trying to get an ice cream cone in once in a while from the drugstore. But going to Korea felt so different, and that sort of difference, I think it's there, it's sort of there. You could read it in the technology, but also in our language, and the way she sort of brings me out to the shopping malls and starts wanting to make me look a little different. So it reads in really interesting ways.
It does. I loved those scenes where you're with your mom and you're really kind of stepping into a different world and shopping for the coat. And then there's this kind of almost glamorous drama that happens with the sales girl who's going to sell the coat, and a lot of, I could just imagine this nonverbal body language that happens with a glamorous older woman, your mom, and then kind of this one-upmanship with class happening between the customer and the sales girl. And it's just fascinating because it's walking into this world of adulthood, but of like a very sophisticated older woman, quite a bit older than you. So if I say Rosalind Russell, I don't know if you know what I mean, but but someone who comes in who just has a lot of presence and style, and the way you write it is just so nice. It's really came across really visually for me.
Right. I love that whole scene. I think it was one of the first chapters I wrote, the prose chapters that I wrote for the memoir, because it was still so close and vivid. But I love what you say about my mother's sort of the class and the mannerism and the language, and how it all plays out in buying this coat and trying to get a deal out of it. There's still this sort of way of speaking to each other that comes out, and in the body too, just like you said.
One of the so I had a little trouble writing this question just because I really felt it, but now it was hard to express. So one of the many remarkable things about the magical language of others is how you show yourself, how you show MJ having different experiences. She's part of her parents' experience as immigrants, but there's also this generational difference, and she is in these moments when she's kind of living multiple identities. I like the German expression sitting between two chairs, except it's way more than two chairs for a lot of this book. And that does feel like daily life for many of us, intersectionality and so forth. But there are a lot of emotional borders and generational borders that I think she crosses. And this feeling of carrying the weight of history, the 1948 Jeju Island massacre, your grandmother, Kumiko, those are part of your experience as a younger person as well. And you write about very difficult things that are very painful, very frightening, that have lasting effects on people. And as you're moving through the story and going between countries, you're always going between languages. So if I remember correctly, one of your grandmothers would speak Chinese at home, your paternal grandmother, is that right? Yes, and then so we have Japanese, Spanish, English in Davis, California, Korean, and Japanese are all languages that would have been part of your personal world. And when your mother is writing these letters, sometimes she's kind of almost acting as a translator herself. Can you say a little bit more about how the form of Korean that she was writing to you in is like really informal, or like you would write to a person maybe a little younger than you were at the time she wrote them?
That's a great question, and thank you for sort of walking us through that. It's so, I love that you set up the context so well to make sure that we're all there, and it's so clear that I want to go right where your thought is going, and I want to meet you right there so we could go take that a bit deeper. My mother, I translated my mother's letters, and she was writing to me in a sort of kiddie diction, sort of an easier version of Korean, hoping that I might understand it, because my Korean at the time wasn't as proficient as it is now. And there would be times when she would also translate. She would, if she couldn't think of the word, she would look up in the English dictionary and write the first English dictionary definition of the word. And sometimes her translation of the English word would be wrong. So one example is in her letters, she's writing in Korean, and then she's thinking of this word and thinks, okay, it's a little more difficult, I'm going to translate it into English. And what she means, I believe, is a sort of way we hold ourselves with confidence, or ways we can bring ourselves forward, but she translates it into propaganda. And it changes the sentence. It sounds sort of like, you should have more propaganda about you. And it's just, I think those moments when you see my translation and then her translation in a sort of our own or her own language that we've made, I really wanted that to be visible, her choices, and I wanted to keep the word that she's using, which is why you have the original copies of the letter. And I think, I really feels like it lends a sense of humor and levity, and it also does something to the language that, for a moment, when you read that, you can see my mother sitting down and looking up the word in the dictionary and writing it, and having as many different engagements with the artifact of those letters felt important to keep.
Yeah, that was a really wonderful thing. So I know nobody can see this, but she often will draw these very charming little cartoons and letters in it. So there'll be English letters sometimes, and then other times there are these cartoon figures, like this one is greeting you. I thought that was just, it's so personal. It's really lovely. So I, in my research for this evening, which I was of course looking forward to so much, I came across something you wrote, and something totally unrelated, which was a book review. The book is How I Became a North Korean by Chris Lee, published in World Literature Today. But you have a really interesting statement. When we begin to think of I, in quotes, as plural, though we live in a society that embraces the word I, we dare to see and act from a place of reverence. And I, definitely something that we relate to as kids, because we're connected to our parents and our families. But I really related to it as a Black person, where you just kind of have the default little I, and um, hearing that, anytime I hear that from other cultures, I also kind of find myself relating to it immediately, just because there's a kind of, I feel like an emotional commonality, even though the cultures are obviously quite different. Um, in October 2021, Poetry Magazine published a short piece by you called American Han, and I hope that people will read it. It is online. Could I ask you to please explain the concept of Han?
Yeah, of course. It's got it's a Korean word that's considered untranslatable. It's a word that's supposed to not have an equivalent in the English, but I think in general, the words used to try and define it is a sort of deep sadness, grief, historical trauma. Sometimes people say rage, but in my work and in my research, I feel like the definition I've come to is Han is a gap. It's more like a gap, and it's a gap between the moment of atrocity or whatever has been sort of taken, and the possibility of reparation. So it's the gap between these things, and I think that allows Han to have some room and some more dimension when you think of it as a gap. But the reason that that's important is I also think that if you close that gap, it it's no longer Han. And I think that Han is something that's maintained. It's something that we maintain in ourselves to keep that gap open, because when you close it and you no longer have Han, then it starts to feel like you don't know who you are without Han. And that sort of closure, I feel like, is also an important aspect of what I'm seeing with the way we interact with Han. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. It's really interesting. I think maybe the generation before me would have called it soul, except it's always more complicated than that. Yeah, and generational trauma is not exactly it either, because it's more than that. From what you said and what I'm trying to understand, I think it acknowledges people's tenacity as well. Um, the suffering is acknowledged, but there's also the tenacity and how people responded.
Right. How you maintain Han. And I do feel, and different researchers, writers, artists might feel other ways about this, but it seems like Han as an emotion is a universally felt thing. There are many cultures and people all around the world who can feel Han. That's very relatable on a human scale. And maybe one thing that's interesting is that the word is that there's a word for it in Korean, and that sort of points to an interesting history. But Han is, you could sense it in anyone, and that might be a sort of way that I'm thinking of Han. That I think there's a divide where there's a question of, okay, but there's an original Han that's only from Korea, and that only Koreans born and raised in Korea could understand, or maybe it's just that generation. But I'm sort of pushing what Han does outside, sort of across the Pacific Ocean, because I think it is interesting. So that's a lot of what I'm thinking about in the poetry piece in American Han.
Yeah, I can read a quick quote. When I give a talk about Han in DC, A young man in the audience has a panic attack. Then it happens again at a virtual talk in San Francisco to an older woman, though I don't know until later. Both the man and the woman say the room started to spin when I kept saying the word Han. In psychiatry, the word causes dizziness and heart palpitations. The consequences are real. But then later on, next section, it is not only a suffering, but a suffering that is avoidable and is not avoided. Maybe that's the gap, yeah. And a suffering that breaks us and need not break us. So slightly different question. So there are a lot of layers, as we were talking before, to a feeling of self and identity. Some of that is played out when Anji goes to study Japanese language in Tokyo, but the course is specifically a Japanese language course for Korean students. And the social dynamics between the students in that part of the book were, of course, really interesting. One of the early things that stood out for me was how the Korean students were always conscious of possible cultural tensions, their presence in Japan, learning Japanese, and awareness of historical realities. It made me think of W.B. Du Bois and double consciousness, always constant awareness of two souls, or two warring souls and one dark body. Considering that language is one of the central themes of the memoir, I did want to remind our audience of the audiobook version of Magical Lives of Others. I first encountered your book in print, and of course I bought it to the library where I work because I wanted other people to read it. And got a copy of my own to read again for the Washington State Book Awards judging process. And it was only later I was like, oh, I can also listen to the audiobook. And I had kind of different reading experiences with each one, and really liked them very much, even though they're kind of different. And as I mentioned before in my email, I listened to almost all of the entire book when I was outdoors and moving around and working in a garden. And sometimes I would just stop what I was doing and stand and listen to it because your phrasing is just beautiful, I have to say. And I was reading the same book, but it wasn't necessarily the same experience. As a teenager, you read your mom's letters aloud in order to better understand Korean because you didn't have that much practice with it at the time. When you write prose, how often do you write your drafts aloud? Read them aloud, sorry.
Thank you. I love that you were listening to the audiobook while you were gardening. I think in my mind, if I could imagine anyone experiencing my book that way, that would be the dream scenario, really. So it's really generous. Thank you for doing that. And I personally, I also feel like the experience is different from the audiobook and from reading it in print. And in some ways, I prefer the audiobook, but in some ways, the sort of exploration of the book as a sort of physical object. I do like the print version, and you do get a sense of the spaces and the spacing, the way the length of the passages, the length of the chapters. You get sort of even the physical letters. You get things visually that I think are a little harder to come by. But with the audio, what's really special, I think for me, is you get to hear the breathing, you get to hear the rhythm, the voice. You get to hear me reading my mother's letters, which is, it's a different thing that's happening. It's another kind of event that's added to the experience of the memoir. And it's reading, I read them in a sort of upbeat, excited way. I sort of take in the language into my body, but going from that to reading the prose chapters, I think was such a beautiful experience. I enjoyed it a lot. And that's the way I write poetry. I always read my lines out loud. And I read the whole book out loud several times. And if there were passages that I felt kind of unsure of, I would just read it aloud and again and again. And sometimes it helps to, most of the times reading it out loud helps, but sometimes I'll play with the spacing on the page. Sometimes I'll change the font or location or make it really bold so I can see visually the space that every word would take up, and trying to figure out if this is where everything is settling at a place that feels right to me. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that's just an interesting process. It's a little different for everyone. The, how did you decide which letters to include? I think you maybe talked about this a little bit before, but knowing that potentially some readers of your book are going to be able to read Korean, were there letters that you thought would help best give people an understanding of what your mom was expressing, for example?
Yeah,
why some letters and not others?
Right. I started with the 49 letters that I found, and I believe there's 10 now. And these 10 felt like the core of, they're also letters where we can see her. I think that was important to get a sense of her everyday life, of what she's doing in Korea, because she's such a big part of this story as well. I wanted her very present, not just in her handwriting, but getting to see her going to a Japanese class, her going shopping and buying a coat for her sister, and wanting to travel and wanting to do all these things.
Yeah, and it came across really beautifully, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
So this year, a co-translation, or rather, you are the co-translator with Marcy Calabretta Canciobello of the South Korean poet Yi Won's poetry collection, The World's Lightest Motorcycle. And that was published by Zephyr Press this year. So it's described as a bilingual publication. I haven't seen the book. So is it parallel text with English on one side and Korean on the other? How does the book look?
Yeah, it does have the original on one side and English on the other. And yeah, it's just such a great interaction to have. I think it's a little, working with Marcy has been such a pleasure. She really feels like a sister to me, a poetry sister. And we met each other at a sort of Asian American fellowship a few years, actually now it's been many years ago, but we've kept in touch and we loved each other's work. And so working with her on this, and Don Mi, who's another wonderful local poet and translator, was translating Kim Hae-soon at the time. And Kim Hae-soon's successor, you might say, is Iwon. And we were working with Don Mi as mentees. And so Don Mi introduced us to Iwon. And it created this really beautiful sisterhood, I would say, of me and Marcy with Iwon and Don Mi and Kim Hae-soon. And it let us meet each other across the world to think about what our writing can do and what we can do for each other. So that was really important. We each also have a very personal relationship to Korea and the language. So it's exciting. Whereas I think in the memoir, it was the choices I made were coming out of the changes and realizations I was making after my program, which was moving away from a seamless translation and translating the Korean in a way that when you read the translation in English, you never forgot that it was from Korean. You never ever felt that Korean was erased, but that it sort of stays present. And I did that by choosing words that sometimes sound Korean. They're not necessarily the perfect translation, but they make your mouth make the shapes of Korean. Sometimes I do it based on the rhythm or the way the sentences break. And I've gotten the feedback that if you're really familiar with Korean and you read both, or you just hear the translation, it's even if it's in English, it sounds like you're hearing Korean. And
Wow.
that's important to do because of they're not just languages, right? These languages, they point to histories, and those histories are part of the countries and their relationship with each other, with English being historically dominant and Korean being historically non-dominant. And I realized as a translator, there is an action and there is a choice I'm making in the way that I translate. And so Marcy and I've also talked about this a lot. It's just thinking of our process and getting closer and closer to what everything means and what it does, not just looking at the end result. So that's been a big part.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. I mean, I'm not a Korean speaker, but the way you describe it, I really want to see what that's like. What type of prose might you consider writing in the future? And I know that your PhD research and study involves film, but do you see yourself maybe writing a screenplay or a story treatment for a film in the future?
Yeah, I'm really lucky to have done some writing for the screen, and it's something I want to keep doing. I think the visual component is so interesting because it reminds me a lot of poetry. I was talking with a friend of mine about how filmmaking and poetry are so similar because it's about the cuts. It's not the scenes themselves. It's about where you leave someone off and where you begin again. And it's not about what you show or say. It's about what you don't show and what you don't say. And in that way, I felt myself get closer and closer to the process of screenwriting or writing screenplays and exploring film a bit more. And prose is just so, it's just a wonderful place for me to go as well. So I've been working on a little bit of everything, I would say, including poetry, like American Han, which I'm going to extend into more. It's going to have essay and memoir and reporting and sort of multimedia elements to it.
Wow, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that's in process with, I hate to ask any writer, when's it going to be ready? Because that's not a fair question, is it? We don't always know.
Oh, no, it's a totally okay question. And I hope soon. I think I hope it keeps going the way it's going. It's complete in my mind and it's complete in the subconscious world. It's just about bringing it out into this world. So however long that takes.
Great. So I know we need to leave some time for our audience question. I'm just sitting here and talking to you like you're in my house. But regarding social media, other forthcoming publications, where should the audience look and where would you like to be found?
Yeah, just on my social media is great. I respond to messages, and something I do is I write love letters to strangers. It was a project I started a long time ago. I'm writing I'm writing 1,000 love letters to strangers, and I believe I just sent my 323rd, I want to say, love letter. But that's really easy. You just send me an email, and it's a few things you got to give me if you want this love letter, which is just a little bit about yourself and a struggle or question. But the most important thing is your physical mailing address, because I handwrite the letters and I send them to you. And so I still work on that every weekend. It's sort of the most important thing I do. But if you want a love letter, that's how you get one.
When did you start that project? And why did you start that project?
I started it maybe a year before my memoir and poetry book came out, maybe a year or two before. And I had gone through a major dip in my writing process. And I decided that maybe if I can live without writing, it's worth giving it a try. Because at the moment, writing became sort of a way to live, and that put me in sort of an unhealthy state. And so I decided to let go of writing for about, I think I didn't write for quite a while, actually. And but instead what I did was, I kind of want to write love letters though. If I never wrote again, if I never got a chance to write a book, well, what's important to me? It's not that. What is the thing that's important? And it was human connection. And so I thought I would be happy with just writing strangers love letters. That would mean the world to me. And so that's when I started, and I've been doing it ever since. So it's not part of any project. It's just a personal thing that I enjoy doing. And it's also something I should have mentioned when you asked about the pandemic, because I've been writing so many love letters during this time.
Oh, that's fascinating. But, okay, everyone, you heard it. Come get your love letters. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. Thank you so much, EJ. I really appreciate all of your thoughtful and insightful responses.
Thank you.
I really hope that everyone will not only read the memoir, but tell a friend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. That has been such a pleasure to listen to you both in conversation. We do have a couple of questions from the audience, and I just want to also let folks know that they can still put more questions into Q&A or chat if they have them. But let me read the first question that came in for you. An audience member asks, I know a number of younger Korean American people in Korea who go to Jeju for a holiday, and they never mention the history of the massacre. How much do people know about that history? It's been called the Hawaii of Korea, and it seems many people treat it as a vacation spot. And I'm tempted to ask, but I feel it's not really my place to bring it up.
Oh, yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah, Jeju Island has a big sort of tourism industry, just from all over. And even here in the States, I believe the way we know Jeju is in American popular culture is the sea diving women, the haenyeo, the way we talk about Jeju, that comes up a lot in advertisements and commercials for like athletic wear, which is really interesting. But Jeju has the history of being a matriarchal society. It had a different and its own unique culture and economy, and was a sort of different from mainland Korea in that way. But the history of the massacre is so, it's really interesting. It depends, I want to say it depends on who you ask. And it depends like what language you're asking in as well. Are you asking someone in Korea, or are you reading a Korean textbook, or are you reading something like in Japanese that mentions it, or in English that mentions it, or anywhere else? Because it's very few sort of hard texts, I would say, that give the same account. Even for me, most of what I know goes into oral history and family history, and because it's such a personal part of my family is why I have such a sort of intimate sense of when I go to Jeju. That's something that comes up for me. But I remember when I was writing that scene in the chapter, I don't want to take away from what my grandmother loved so much about Jeju, and what I also love is just the they have these like bright yellow flowers all over the hills and mountains. They have, beautiful like indigenous horses, and this it's just an incredible like atmosphere in the air, and they have there's so much to love as well. And I think a part of the way I interact with that and what's going on today is I call it table setting because it's easy, but yes, it has the historical trauma, the atrocity, the pain, and the fact that we still don't know a lot today. A lot of things have been burned down, hidden, erased, and we're still trying to find ways to find justice and reparation for that. And at the same time, that the rule is you can only add to the table, you can't take anything off the table. And so on top of that, it's also a beautiful place, and it has a rich history and culture, and just so many beautiful stories about women there. And that's something that goes like hand in hand for me. So
Thank you. Another question that came in from an audience member. What were the most enjoyable and the most challenging parts of the book to write based on your own life?
Most enjoyable and challenging. I can say the most challenging is, I think it's the first chapter, the first prose chapter with when I go to Davis. Those chapters were really difficult for me to write. I rewrote them. Sometimes they would be many chapters long, and I would cut it back down. I would add scenes and take them away. And most of what I originally wrote for that chapter is gone. I sort of took it all out because I had to, sometimes I would put in a scene and it would be bullying, or it would be something else I'd encountered, but I had to ask myself, why am I putting that scene there? And what is the one thing I really, really want someone to know? And I think when it came down to it, it was just those hours I spent in the room. It was just the days and the months. It was the moments where I was doing nothing, and there was nothing to look forward to, and there was nothing for me to feel. It was just sitting around. So I think that was challenging to get down to. And that's not to say I won't write about the other stuff later down the road. Some of the parts I really enjoy, I enjoyed writing about June and Lee quite a bit. And same with my grandmother Kumiko as well, because and those chapters I feel like came really fast for me, because those are stories that I've heard since I was really little. They were repeated to me almost like bedtime stories or warning stories my mother would use, but it felt like, okay, going over something that I felt I'd been prepared to go over for so long, and finally getting a chance to do that. And also doing it no longer as that girl, but as using the other things that I've been able to gather, which is like research and reading and trying to pinpoint the dates and locations and filling that picture up. For me, the power of having a narrative together that way was so incredibly uplifting. Even if the stories are not, it was helpful to do that.
Thank you. I think that's all that has come in through chat, but I have one more question as well. I think we have time for, I hope. I was wondering what languages you dream in.
What languages do I dream in? I dream so much. I wonder if I'm not resting enough. I dream almost every night, and I used to keep a dream journal to help with it, but I think it changes. When I was in Japan, I was dreaming in Japanese. When I was in Korea, I would dream in Korean. And here I think it's sort of a little bit of everything, but the things I remember are mostly feelings. It's almost like the image and language, they're not as sufficient as I want them to be in dreams. And that's why they can be so terrifying, because the experience itself seems to point to something else. And maybe that's why I want to keep writing, is trying to do better about communicating, making it clearer, making it more direct of an experience that sort of, yeah.
Thank you so much. Just want to congratulate you again on the award. Thank you for your beautiful work, and I'm really looking forward to the next things, film and books coming in the future. Zola, I want to thank you again for the incredibly thoughtful questions and conversation. It's really a pleasure to hear you two speaking. So thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you. Tonight has been so special and heartwarming, and really needed this, actually. So thank you, Sarah and Zola, and also lots of behind the scenes work in putting this together. And what a meaningful conversation to have. And I really appreciate all the time and generosity that you've put into this. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.